Well, it's Friday morning, Livingston. Today, we've got a very special guest on the hotline this morning. Overton County native Lisa Lewis Tyre. She is an author with 2 books out and in the works on a 3rd. We're going to talk about all that coming up just a few moments. Lisa, just fantastic to have you with us this morning. And Lisa's going to be at the Putnam County Library on Saturday. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But Lisa, first thing, I want to get a little background information on you. You grew up in Overton County. Talk about what it was like growing up in and around Overton County for you.
Well, thanks so much, first of all, for having me. I have to tell you that WLIV featured strongly in my childhood. I have so many memories of listening to the radio, calling in with song requests. You know, this is back in the day when we had to listen to songs and make a cassette recording so we could have our own mixtape. It's kind of a funny story. When I was a teenager, my mother said, you know, you need to go get a job. And so I actually applied at WLIV to be a DJ. And despite the fact I had 0 experience, they never called me back, Tom. So I'm not going to hold that against you. I got denied my first job there. But I have always loved the radio, and just to be asked to be on WLIV is a great honor for me. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for that. We appreciate that.
But growing up in Overton County, I feel like I grew up, I was born out in 65, so I grew up in Overton County in the 70s, and I just refer to it as the glory of the time. It was just an amazing time to be a child in the 70s. You know, we had no cell phones. Our parents, lost track of us. We could just kind of come and go and play outside, and I just love everything about living in a small town. So I feel like, I know we're going to talk about my books, but Last of the Long Island Rebels borrows very strongly a Livingston, and it's just like a love letter from me to my hometown because I absolutely love this area. So.
I was going to ask you about just that because in reading the synopsis about this book, it sounded like it probably resonated somewhat with your background. Can you kind of describe the parallels of your background and that in the story of the Last in the Long Line of Rebels?
Well, so the story it actually takes place in 1999, but every chapter begins with an excerpt from a Civil War diary. And the story is about a young girl who lives in a rundown house in the middle of town, and she learns that the city is going to tear it down. And so she wants to find out something that happened there, and maybe because it's such an old house, that she's going to investigate the history and in hopes that something historical happened and they can get a historical marker and save it. And what she learns is that during the Civil War, a shipment of gold was stolen, and the chief suspect was her great-great-great-grandfather, and the gold was never stolen. So she and her friends decide to search for the gold. But all of that has some history in actually Overton County, because when I was young, I grew up in the area town that's known as Zollicoffer. I don't know if the teenagers today know where Zollicoffer is, but out Hillham Highway, about 3 miles, you get to the section of the town, which when I was growing up, my parents, we'd go visit cousins or we would be out and about, and my mom and dad would eventually say, well, it's time to head back to Zollicoffer. And so finally, when I was about 8 or 9, I said, why do you keep calling it Zollicoffer? And my mom said, well, they think during the Civil War that General Zollicoffer camped there, which I thought was, wow, that's interesting to think that, the Civil War was right there where you live. And finally, I said, well, where exactly was this camp? And my mother said, oh, they think it was over there in this field because, I think in the 50s, some kids were playing out in the garden and found some gold.
Wow.
So you can imagine, this is before we had the internet or cable TV. So I was captivated by that story, and I never forgot it. So when I sat down to write my first book, I thought, that's the story I've got to build on. So.
What led you, Lisa, to really wanting to be an author?
I think I just love to read. I mean, my earliest memories from being in first grade, I thought I want to write a book. And I think that's just because I loved reading. And so you like books, then you want to be a writer. Just like kids love fire trucks, want to grow up to be firemen. That's all I really knew about the publishing business. So that's why, I'm going to be visiting. That's why I'm in town. I'm visiting a library to talk to some young readers. Because back in those days, I had no idea. I didn't know what writing meant. I didn't know how you got published. I had no idea, how any of it worked. I just loved stories. I loved hearing the stories that my family or my grandparents would tell. I loved, the stories about the people around me. And if you gave me a book, you knew you weren't going to even hear from me for, a few days, because I've just always loved stories and books and good writing.
Author Lisa Lewis Tyre, and Overton County native, joining us on Livingston today. You mentioned the event, Donuts with an Author, that's coming up Saturday, April 2nd. That's tomorrow at 1 o'clock. It'll be at the Albrecht Room of the Cookeville branch of the Putnam County Library. Lisa, what else is going to be going on during your time there at the library tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to be there from 1 to 2, and I have some fun interactive presentation that I'm going to do. It's great for kids who, I talk about the writing life. I, give them some insight into just what I told you, where the inspiration for my books come, how you go about writing a book, how how I got it published, some things like that. And they're going to have donuts, and it's just going to be a really fun time. In addition to me, I like to think that I'm a draw, but, they're also having a book sale, which is awesome. So I'm going to do after my presentation, I'm going to sign some books, and then I'm going to wander around and buy as many books as I can, because people who write love to read. So I'm going to make good use of it while I'm there.
Lisa, you've got a great website. I've checked it out. If folks want to see your works or find out more about you, tell us a little bit more information about that, if you would.
Absolutely. I'm everywhere. You can go to Lisa Lewis Tyre, TYRE.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Lisa Lewis Tyre. I'm on Twitter. I have a Facebook page. So if you search Lisa Lewis Tyre, I'm kind of hard to miss. But Instagram is particularly fun because I let my dog, BC, who's an avid reader, do all of my middle grade reviews. And so he has some fun takes on that.
All right. Lisa Lewis Tyre, local author. Again, she's going to be at the Cookeville Putnam County Library on Saturday from 1 until 2 p.m. Lisa, it's been an honor to talk to you today. We appreciate you joining us on Livingston Today.
Thank you so much for having me.